All right. Good afternoon. My name is Michael Childress, and I'm president of the DuPage County NAACP. It is an honor today to be your facilitator. I want to welcome everybody from Chicago and across the nation. This Zoom is brought to you by the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. And from now on, I'll refer to it as the League because I'm not very good with acronyms. It was co-founded in 1915 by Chicago's Nobel Peace Prize winner Jane Addams, as well as others. The League is the oldest international women's peace group with branches across the nation and in other countries. As we begin, I'm reminding everyone to stay muted, except for the speakers as we call on them. Efforts to restart the Chicago branch are bearing fruit. Please consider joining the league at www.wilpfus.org. The link is in the chat. Once you enter your address, we will automatically put you on the Restart Chicago branch. Dues are just $35 a year. And really, when you think about it, it's just under 70 cents a day. In fact, it's a week. We will unite you with peace women across the globe. I wish to thank the U.S. section of the League for hosting this important Zoom on immigration. This is a particularly sensitive issue in Chicago. Our keynote speaker is legal historian Professor Felice Batlin. But first, I want to introduce Angela Medina, the executive director of the Jane Addams Peace Association and the Jane Addams Children's Books Award. The Peace Association has been working closely with Chicago primary schools to bring the authors of these award-winning children's books together about peace and conflict resolution to students in our city. Welcome, Ms. Medina. Please tell us more about the program and how it works and how we can support it.
Thank you so much, Michael. It's a pleasure to be here. And thank you all. It's great to see such a large group of people dedicated to the causes that we have of peace and social justice. And there's so much going on right now. But I wanted to share a little bit in a few minutes about our program that we started. We expanded about a couple years ago called the Books in Their Hands program. It is essentially a program where I fundraise money to bring books, author visits, so bringing the author as well as donating a book to each of the students in the class that we're visiting to low-income schools. We are national, the Jane Addams Peace Association. As you all may know of us as really for the award ceremony we have each year, highlighting a winner and two honor books for chapter book category and a picture book category. This is a program that we started 2 years ago to really expand on what we're doing besides having the award, which we found was very important, but how do we bring these to the students who really need them? How do we increase literacy? How do we give kids an opportunity to really see themselves in the books? So this program has really been phenomenal. We have reached 700 students in 2022, 1,100 in 2023. And our goal is to continue that expansion, obviously, with, as we increase our fundraising efforts. We hope that we're able to serve more and more students. We have an application process, which is currently right now on hold because we did receive many applicants and we are trying to serve those before we open up the application process again. But the goal again is for students to be able to meet an author, to be able to have their own copy of the author's book, and they're all Jane Addams Association Book Award winners. And in that visit, there's an opportunity to get their book signed. There's an opportunity really for dialogue to discuss the contents of the book, discuss the issues that come up with the book, and all of the criteria for our book award is social justice, peace, and equity. So all of the books do fit that one or another of those criteria. We're currently working with the Boucher International School on the South Side for a federal grant we partnered on. And this is the last year of the grant. So this has been about 2.5, a little bit over 2 years, where we've been able to serve the school, specifically focused on the lack of racial health disparities, but the grant is for that. But we tied in how it starts when they're young. It starts with the literacy, starts with the education. And, you know, the beauty about the grant is it actually starts from the beginning of them not having access, right? The literacy rates in Chicago, recently I read, was like 11% for Black students who are reading at the level that they should, the reading level, and 17% for Latino students, which is really disturbing. So we hope that this program, you know, with additional funding, we can expand it to other schools in Chicago. As that grant I mentioned is near the end. We have seen that, you know, it definitely is very well appreciated. The students engage in the program. When we bring the author, you could just see them light up. The questions are amazing. Teachers work with them. We donate the books prior to the visit, so they're aware of the content, which is really important. Their ELA teachers, art teachers, work with them on the content, and also the pictures for the picture books. And they come with you know, some really, really amazing questions for the author. And it has been really inspiring to see them really so engaged when they get to meet the author, many for the first time meeting an author, and then getting to walk home, you know, with their own copy of the book signed. It's a really exciting opportunity to be able to offer that to them, and just to see, you know, their expressions, and to be able to get the feedback from the teachers about students who are still talking about, you know, this experience they had, you know, months after we have already left. So that's the gist of really our Books in the Hands program and what we are doing right now at the Jane Addams Peace Association. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Medina. Thank you so much, and especially for all the work you do in Chicago schools. Appreciation for the differences among us and conflict resolution are important lessons for our children to learn. We'll need that kind of sensitivity for a livable future. I'm really delighted to introduce our keynote speaker, an esteemed member of the faculty of the Chicago Kent Law School at the Illinois Institute of Technology, and a legal historian with a deep understanding of immigration policy in our city and its history. Professor Batlin is an expert in the history of Hull House Immigration Protection League, how it began, and the lessons it holds for us during today's immigration crisis in Chicago. Welcome, Professor Batlin.
Thank you so much. I'm really thrilled to be here, and thank you to both the organizers and for each of you for your time today. I'm going to start sharing my screen, in that I do have a PowerPoint. So just make sure here, and let's see, I just want this to go back here. Okay, so I am a legal historian, and not all that many people know what legal historians actually do. But what I do is I look at the history of law, and one of the things that I'm particularly interested in is how legal services are provided to people on the ground. So today I'm going to be talking about the Immigrants Protective League of Chicago, deeply connected with Hull House. But before I began, I wanted to tell you a little bit about why I started to write on the topic. So I think many of us will remember that on January 27th of 2017, Trump issued an executive order banning migrants from 7 predominantly Muslim countries. And this led to large protests at airports and at other places. And it included airport lawyers, a new term, who attempted to provide legal advice to those who had landed in airports, so migrants in airports who are now banned from entering the United States. And there were a couple of really big questions swirling around. One was, lawyers had not confronted this before, so how were they going to be able to help and what they could do? The big question was could Trump's executive order actually be constitutional and legal? And that was also an open question. And moreover, in my own mind, I was asking what were the historical precedents for those who just sought to provide legal help to migrants. So this brought me, and I'm just having a little trouble right now with my PowerPoint. This brought me to, I'm sorry, this is a picture here of airport lawyers in January 2017. And I can tell you from experience, this was unorganized. Lawyers just showed up in the airports. There were no tables for them to sit at, with essentially the question of what can I do? How do I help? So before we go into the Immigrants Protective League, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the incredible immigration dichotomies that have driven both immigration policy really throughout much of US history. So from the 1840s on, the US has had a very fraught relationship with immigration. On the one hand, there's the powerful trope that we all know that the US is the land of immigrants. Yet on the other hand, there have always been powerful forces that argued that immigrants stole jobs, that they were physically and mentally inferior, that they were criminals, and they could not assimilate to democracy and US culture. And we should be very familiar with those tropes already. The interesting thing, though, is that these two discourses exist in tandem and in conflict with one another. So a little bit about early restrictive immigration laws. So until the 1880s, immigration was primarily in the power of the states and not the federal government. That did not mean that there were no immigration laws or that immigrants were just accepted. Rather, the states had their own individual power to, in fact, not allow immigrants to enter into the states. So recent scholarship has shown how this has deeply affected Irish migrants attempting to flee the Irish potato famine, who landed in Massachusetts. Massachusetts simply took these people, very poor people, put them on boats, headed anywhere else, whether it was London, the ports of Scotland, the ports of Ireland, and left them on the streets. The historian who writes about this believes that many of these people, often women, died either in the journey or after having reached the ports. Okay, so the first federal legislation that we see is the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act passed by the US Congress. And the Chinese Exclusion Act prevented Chinese laborers from entering into the US, right? So this is extraordinarily racist, right off the bat. And the idea was that Chinese laborers were in fact stealing jobs from like real Americans. 1891, the federal government, through Congress, takes a big leap in controlling immigration, and with it, the power to admit or deport migrants. So states no longer have that power. And so a huge federal apparatus begins to be built in 1891. In 1892, Ellis Island itself was opened. Now, to be admitted or not deported as a migrant, one could not be, and this is very important legal language, one could not be likely to become a public charge. That meant that a migrant or an immigrant, right, attempting to come into the US in the discretion of the US bureaucracy that was part of immigration law, you had to prove that you would not become a public charge. And under this provision, large numbers of migrants were excluded on this ground. And there was also a constant roar to create stricter immigration laws. Okay, so that's the one side. On the other side, we have pro-immigration sentiment. And this was really best exemplified by Chicago's Immigrant Protective League. and it made strong arguments in favor of immigration and sought to help immigrants in a number of different ways. The Immigrants Protective League was created in 1908. It was run by Grace and Edith Abbott, and later Adina Rich. It was always deeply connected to Jane Addams' Hull House, and many of its leaders resided there. Another social worker by the name of Sophonisba Breckenridge was also a longtime board member and an active participant. So the Immigrants Protective League actually worked very, very closely with Jane Addams' Hull House, but it was separate from Hull House and never shared its offices. The League advocated for less restrictive immigration laws while providing a variety of significant services to immigrants, which eventually included legal services. And here are just pictures of Grace and Edith Abbott, who were sisters, as well as Sophonisba Breckenridge, who is on the right-hand side of your screen. Okay, so the League's early work. One of the League's missions was to protect young immigrant women traveling from Ellis Island to Chicago. And you have to imagine that at the turn of the century, even middle class and upper class women's roles and what they could do was very constricted. But the idea of helping young women fit well within what was considered to be an appropriate women's sphere of responsibility. League employees met trains carrying immigrants, helped them find taxis, avoid scams, track down relatives, located shelters for them. And this was especially important for immigrants who did not speak English. And I will say, I live across from Union Station, and I never thought in my life that I would see busloads of immigrants simply unloaded at Union Station. But this is the help that they provided, whether it was handing out sandwiches or anything else, is exactly what the League did in its early years. The League drew very significantly upon Hull House's contacts and its very important access to immigrant networks and communities. They further informed immigrants, especially immigrant women, of English classes, potential employment, where to seek medical care. And with that, they also attempted to produce new knowledge about immigrants. So drawing upon the work of Hull House, which was itself famous for producing an understanding of immigrant cultures, but also for its social science research, the Abbotts, along with Breckenridge, used their experience working with the League to produce new types of knowledge. And through this new type of knowledge, it wasn't merely for the sake of knowledge. They then engaged in trying to pass a variety of legal reforms, including the regulation of employment agencies and maximum hour laws for women. They also understood that immigrant women were subject to what we would now call sexual harassment, and they sought to warn women away from certain employees. And this was really radical for the time, right? A time in which the language of sexual harassment wasn't even known. So what was the League's discourse in favor of immigration? It was compelling. They argued that immigration strengthened the US and was absolutely crucial to its identity. That immigration was a source of renewal for the US. That the US also owed, and I think this is really key, an affirmative duty to immigrants, which would later pay off in the creation of loyal citizens. And that affirmative duty to immigrants meant finding them employment. It meant finding them decent shelter. It meant providing what was necessary to keep them out of poverty. The other arguments were, of course, that many in the US were once immigrants, and that we cannot, and this was sort of smart, celebrate the Puritans. We cannot sit down to some idea of, Thanksgiving without celebrating immigrants themselves. Allowing for immigration was also considered part of the social contract and required by both humanitarianism as well as human rights. And they argued that the very nature of the immigrant already demonstrated that they valued American ideas and democracy because they were choosing the United States. And to choose the United States demonstrated even more so than having been born in the United States, the necessary traits of being able to assimilate and function within a democracy. The other thing that the League did was it produced empirical data. So in other words, in a way that many progressives tried to argue, facts were important. And Grace and Edith Abbott did a vast amount of research on immigration using their experiences with the League and Hull House. And they used this research to try to refute arguments against anti-immigration groups. And they argued, no, immigrants do not seek welfare or private charity, and they are not a drain on the economy. In fact, they added to the economy. They argued that to the extent that immigrants lived in poverty, that this was an indictment of the state and not individual immigrants. It was an indictment of the state in terms of allowing for substandard housing in the first place. They had to refute the argument that immigrants engaged in criminal behavior, and they did this by using statistics to show that Native whites engaged in crimes in much greater percentages than did immigrants. And they also spoke about how immigrants, often due to racism, suffered from police brutality and discrimination. And so these were really strong arguments that they presented. So all data that they came up with and published in multiple different forms, in books and in articles and in posters, was that immigrants do not take away jobs from Americans. And the argument they made was that the economy was unrelated to the number of immigrants who entered into the US, but rather unemployment and low wages was related to unregulated capitalism, not immigration. So the League, like many progressives, believed that facts could change people's minds. And the question is, could they really? Do they really? I think that's very pertinent for today's politics. Okay, so the League's legal practice, what did they do? Slowly, the League moved from providing just general services to immigrants to providing legal services. And this was extraordinary at a time when the practice of immigration law did not yet exist, and there were very few women attorneys. So the Abbotts and Breckinridge and the League really create the very practice of immigration law. Frequently, the League represented migrants who were being detained on Ellis Island, and you can see a picture here of a woman and her children going through Ellis Island. And they especially were concerned with women. And it was very difficult for women to immigrate on their own because of the fear that they would become a public charge, especially when they had children. So the League worked very diligently on their behalf to allow them to be released into the United States. They had tremendous success in doing this. In part by using Hull House's contacts and by having direct relationships with high-level immigration officials. And they did this for a couple of decades, and they did it very, very well. However, what happens in 1921, and there's a mistake here, and in 1924, is that there are new immigration laws. Immigration laws drastically changed following World War I. Congress passed such laws in what can only be understood as an absolute fit of xenophobia and racism. Immigration laws were now based upon a quota system, which was determined by nationality that greatly preferred Western and Northern Europeans to Southern and Eastern Europeans. And if you look at this cartoon over on the right-hand side, and it says 3%, and that's because these quota numbers were based upon the quota of 3% of the nationality of people currently in the US. So it had an incredible effect upon the ability to immigrate for actually much of the world. As this happened, the League bore witness to what this did to their own clients. And importantly, as these laws changed, as the 1921 Act and then the 1924 Act came into effect, tens of thousands of migrant visas were simply nullified. And often these people who were in the process of migration were simply stuck in some third place as they learned that their visas were no longer valid, not because of anything that they did, but because the immigration scheme itself had changed. So what did they do? The League documented and widely protested how these laws broke up families, again, very resonant with the present, and defeated the legitimate expectations of immigrants, causing, quote, human suffering beyond estimation. The League vehemently opposed the quota laws, as in this was, again, language that they used as blatantly racist, and rejected the idea that any sense of intelligence or the ability to be a successful immigrant mapped on to race or nationality. So just an example that the League gave, under the quota laws in 1925, it would take 80 years for a person from Italy and 125 years for a Hungarian to actually obtain a visa to the US. The League wrote, facts such as these astonish and humiliate. The League also became very involved in deportation cases as they really ramped up in the 1920s, especially in Chicago. There were vast raids conducted against the Chicago Mexican community. The ability to immigrate was also further restricted when President Hoover signed an executive order, and again, executive order, not a law passed by Congress, during the Depression in response to the argument that immigrants were taking away jobs. Under the order, the State Department was to examine immigration rules and practices to determine how to further reduce immigration, right? So this is the executive branch doing this. And the State Department, who was very, very like racist, anti-Semitic, xenophobic at the time, greatly increased the documentation and the standard required to demonstrate that one would not become a public charge. It became almost impossible to do so. It boasted that in 5 months, 100,000 visas were denied under the new standard. The same time, during the Depression, deportations continued to accelerate, and the League furiously declared that the civil rights of those being deported were often violated. In fact, they called what the government was doing a bill of wrongs. They become very suspicious of both immigration law and government officials. And they argue that immigration law, as it was coming into being, was inchoate, xenophobic, and unconstitutional. These were arguments that were radical for the times, and I believe they track the current state of immigration law. Finally, Adina Rich could foresee that with the rise of Hitler, that many refugees would be unable to enter the US and would in fact die. And she was very, very clear about that. So the League continued to provide a wide range of services to immigrants and act as an immigrant advocacy organization into the 1960s. It eventually merged into Heartland Alliance, located in Chicago, and one of the largest organizations that provide services and representations to immigrants. And in a beautiful circle or an ugly circle, of course, Heartland was one of the organizations that sued the Trump administration over the Muslim ban. So in many ways, the League's work continues to be with us. So what are some of the parallels with the present? And here in this picture, we can see a bus, one of the buses from Texas intended to take migrants anywhere, right, elsewhere and dump them. Then the signs that are being carried, right, no new immigrants, no new taxes, and the idea that somehow that such a discourse is in fact patriotic. So anti-immigration discourse repeats itself over and over again with the same refrains. And we can see these refrains again from the 1840s to the present. And what is so striking to me as a historian is that these refrains don't necessarily change. Immigration law, which is supposed to be part of what we call the rule of law, and the rule of law is deeply connected to democracy, instead changes without notice. And if you've been reading about the Biden administration's current plans in connection with asylum law, we even see that under an administration that might be better than previous administrations, that families, that immigrants are kept in this sort of waiting limbo as to what will happen. We continue to see family separations, and we continue to see an incredible lack of aid for new immigrants, which is absolutely crucial. Asylum seekers also must be given their right to asylum. So I'm going to stop there. Thank you very much for listening to me. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and come back into the meeting. And I'll just end by saying, I think that for any of us who are interested in immigration and immigration law, the League provides both a model for what can be done, right, and how they function, as well as a post as to how little has actually changed in the many years since the League ceased to exist. I think we're doing some questions and answers here now.
Well, thank you so much, Professor Batlin, for sharing your perspective on this important Chicago history. I thought it was outstanding. If there's any questions for the professor, please raise your hand and we'll call on you. There'll also be some time for Q&A after the other speakers also. But right now, any questions for the professor?
I see Marilyn Foster's hand up and then Martha Collins.
Thank you, Felice, and thank you. I've learned so much from you. I really appreciate this. My question is, since the League has ceased to exist, is it now continuing on as the Heartland Alliance?
Yes, it was merged in 1960 into the Heartland Alliance. And, you know, the moment of settlement movements, right, had come to an end at that point. And so it made sense, in fact, for it to merge. All the original founders of the League were no longer alive, but the work of the League sort of continues on in Heartland Alliance, which is an extraordinary organization.
I put the link to Heartland Alliance in the chat. Martha?
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much. The presentation was great. And as a original Chicagoan, I'm just sitting over here in awe of so much history that you were able to give us in such a concise time. My question is, this wasn't that long ago. All of this that you share with us, you know, was not that long ago. And there's power in stories. Has anyone, I keep thinking of the mother in Ellis Island with her small children. Is there anyone, are there any kind of projects that's happening that's collecting those stories to talk to the children that came through Ellis Island, or that was a part of Hull House, or, you know, just this point in time in history for our country? Is there any projects that's happening right now that's following up with those families? Thank you.
Thank you so much for those comments. And that's such a great question. There's a lot of different projects that collect immigrant history. For an easy one, the U.S. Naturalization and Immigration Service actually have a ton of oral histories. In terms of the Jane Addams papers themselves, there's a number of videos as well as oral histories that are all located at, or not all, but many of them are located at the University of Illinois, which is where I did most of my own research. For James Adams' works, those are at University of Illinois. there's a really nice collection also at Swarthmore. I don't know though that I don't know of any oral histories of people who were actually clients of the League itself. But within the League documents, they do an amazing job of telling the stories of these immigrants. And I didn't include the stories here, but they are really heartbreaking stories. One of the other things I didn't say is that in the 1920s, the Armenian genocide was occurring. And so you have a lot of Armenians trying to get into the US. And there's all types of complicated questions, including whether or not they are white, because you had to be white to be able to immigrate, or African American. And those were considered, right? Armenians were not necessarily considered to be white. There are also all these schemes in which Armenians are trying to get to the US, and they go first to Cuba, trying to get into Cuba, then they try to get in through Mexico, and the ways in which their attempts are foiled. I've written a full article about this, and if anybody is interested, you are welcome to email me, and I will email you a copy of the article. And if my email could be put into the chat, that would be amazing. And if not, I'll do it after I stop speaking. But the League did a very good job of speaking about the stories of individual people. And I'll say this was a way to create sympathy and also demonstrate the tremendous need for immigration.
Thank you, Professor Batlam. We're going to move on a little bit and move into our next speaker. Again, I really do appreciate you, Professor. It was really great.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And I want to thank everybody who raised their hands and brought up those good questions too. Now, Reverend Zenobia is co-pastor of the Bethel Community Mennonite Church in the historic Hull House neighborhood and is with us. Reverend Zenobia, welcome. Please tell us about the historic ties your church has to Hull House and the work you're doing now. Reverend Zenobia?
You're muted and you're twice.
Okay.
Do we have
Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Yeah.
now we can.
Okay, very good. Yes, I grew up in the Abla community, which is just down around the corner from University of Illinois. And I remember being involved as a young adult in the Jane Addams Hull House Center that was not far, or I guess maybe on the U of I campus. Our church is a Mennonite church. My father pastored there for about 20 years before, back in the 60s. And I grew up in that church, and now I'm co-pastoring with my husband at that same church. And yeah, so we've got quite a history of peacemaking and peace loving and bringing community together as best we could at that time. And, you know, the struggle still goes on, but we continue to try to be faithful to that call for peace and to provide for those who are marginalized and less fortunate.
All right. Thank you so much, Reverend Zenobia. It's good to learn more about what the meaningful work you have in the city. Another church group that has worked tirelessly with the new immigrants in the city. And we're happy to have Marilyn Foster with the Catholic Migrant Ministry that is centered at the St. Edward School in Oak Park. Welcome, Ms. Foster. Please tell us more about your ministry and how it got started. What are the services they're able to provide, and what how the public can assist you.
Hi, yes, I'd be happy to. I'm sitting in for Celine Woznica, who many of you may know, who did spearhead our ministry. The Catholic parishes of Oak Park Migrant Ministry grew out of the need witnessed at the nearby Chicago District 15 police station when migrants were dropped off there. And it's really just across the border from our community of Oak Park, our suburb, just on the west side of Austin. We're right across Austin from Chicago, and was about 4 blocks away. And there were many, many different groups that were serving at the police station the needs of the migrants there. So the Chicago Parishes of Oak Park Migrant Ministry Committee started to work on finding housing for particular families, and then to recruit volunteers to accompany these families. I'm accompanying one of them, and setting up utilities, explaining options for banking, medical appointments, procuring furniture, household goods and groceries, that type of thing. A major need at the police station, since there were, I'm trying to remember how many at one time, you know, the tent cities grew up outside. So there were so many, many migrants staying there, and there were 2 bathrooms, you know, one men's and one women's, and the sink was about this big. So not only were there no showers, but you couldn't even really get your head in there to wash your hair. So we started a Celine spearheaded the beginning of what we called showers at St. Catherine St. Lucie Parish, which is actually one of the Oak Park churches that is actually on Austin Boulevard. So it was very close. We started trying to provide transportation, but the migrants really just wanted to walk. So we didn't really need to transport them. They'd come over, they'd line up outside this tiny little rectory, and you know, it was a very limited space. We had up to 300 every Tuesday and Thursday morning from 8 to about 11. We would be open for showers, and there were 5 showers open. The water bill skyrocketed to, I don't even want to say how much that was, but, and donations were coming in to try to cover some of this. We're trying to work with the Village of Oak Park, you know, could they forgive some of the water bill, you know, all that kind of stuff that I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with. So we had up to 300 migrants, and then we started using the church. It started to grow into a clothing closet as well. We started using the church as well for sorting the donations on Mondays, many, many volunteers for that. Unfortunately, a lot of it goes to Goodwill because people don't target their donations. That's a problem. Right now we have a pause on donations. So then that space was too small, and we found that we could move into the St. Edmund's School building. There was a school called the Children's School. St. Edmund's School had been closed for many years. The Children's School was a private school that was renting the space from the Archdiocese of Chicago. They were told to move out because the building was not fit for them, but it was fit for us, apparently. So the migrant ministry moved. Then the Tuesday, Thursday mornings, they're now called Migrant Ministry Mornings at Centro San Edmundo, the St. Edmund School building. We provide breakfast, shoes, toiletries, blankets, coats, clothing. There are also ESL classes that happen on Tuesday and Thursday mornings. And there's also spiritual guidance. Father Vittorio, a Claretian priest, provides counseling, preparation for weddings, baptisms. On one day over across the street at St. Edmund Church, there were 6 baptisms from migrant families. There was a Spanish Mass on Christmas Eve, and during Lent, there's one every Sunday. I believe it's at 12:30. We also held 2 events that Catholic Charities worked with us. 2 of their, I don't know if they were case managers, what their titles were, but they were, you know, well-versed in immigration law. They came over and guided. We had, I think, between 12 or 15 asylum seekers that were among the families that we sponsor that came and were guided through completing their documents, and then the migrant ministry paid for their TPS, which, as you know, is $541 per person, $50 for children. That's pretty much in a nutshell what we've done so far. Now another entity is moving a shelter into the other half of Centro San Edmundo of the school building. So that's any day now. The migrants that are currently residing in the Carlton Hotel and the Oak Park YMCA are going to be invited, the families, just families, are going to be invited to move over, and there's another entity that has cleared out classrooms, refurbished them, brought in room dividers, and there's going to be a shelter there in the next few days. So the migrant ministry will work with the shelter in conjunction, sort of, but we are not in charge of that shelter. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Ms. Foster. I appreciate that information on that report. And for your assistance in your group, providing families with the protections that you do. At this time, we're going to open the floor up to the neighbors roundtable. If you are living or working in the Hull House area, neighborhood, and have information to share about the impact of immigrants in the neighborhood and how it impacts the community, please come off the mute and raise your hands, and we'll take your questions. Thank you. I see everybody's on mute. Is there any questions?
Well, I would like to say that this is Mary Beth Garden with WILPF US. It would be great if Marilyn could explain how WILPF Chicago and WILPF US members might be able to assist you. This is a remarkable service that you're offering, and I know Chicago has, as a sanctuary city, has just been overwhelmed with the amount of immigrants coming there. Can you offer some suggestions about how people might be able to help?
Wow, thank you. I would say, first of all, communicate with us at immigrantministry@gmail.com. That would be the way that we can connect with you, and maybe come up with some ideas for that. Thanks.
Could we open this up to everybody? Anybody else want to say something to one of our neighborhood speakers, Reverend Zenobia Sowell or Marilyn Foster, who are from Chicago, and the rest of us? I mean, anybody. I see a hand. Virginia?
Marilyn, can you say that website again?
Yes.
Email address?
Yes, it is Immigrant Ministry. So that's IMMIGRANT Ministry. No spaces, at gmail.com.
Thank you.
And both Celine Woznica and I will get those emails.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I put that into the chat if anyone's looking for it.
Thank you, Mary Beth.
I see a couple hands. There's Martha and Diane, and oh, there's a whole row of them up at the top. Mary Beth.
Okay, Martha,
Sure.
Diane, and then Mary Hanson Harrison.
Sure. I think you started something, Mary Beth. Thank you so much for asking the question of how WILPF US can be involved with some of the work the presenters and things that have been mentioned today. I'm a part of the WILPF US board and co-chair the development committee with Mary Beth. I'm gonna take my WILPF hat off and put my United Nations Association of the USA hat on. I'm a national council representative for UNA USA. And we have on the call, I'm going to put on the spot, Cecilia Torres, who is the UNA Chicago chapter president. And Cecilia and myself and others are on the planning committee to do a regional conference of the UNA Great Lakes states, Illinois, Indiana, Wisconsin, and Michigan this spring. And I just want to say publicly, I hope it's okay we would love to invite you all to be a part of our conversation that we're going to have for the regional conference. And we're looking at talking about the issue of immigration, possibly at that conference. So I appreciate putting the contact information in the chat. Cecilia, if you want to say more about that, but remember our emails or our names when you see it come in asking and requesting that you all present to possibly speak to participants of our regional conference. Thank you. Which will be April 20th in Chicago.
Hey, Diane?
I noticed Virginia Pratt had her hand up way before, and she has it up again, so I think she should go before me, if that's
I'm
okay.
sorry, Virginia, go ahead.
Well, thank you. First of all, the people who do the practical work, thank you very much. I'm thinking about a few years ago, I went to a teach-in that United for a Fair Economy did. And they had 2 benches. And on one bench, they had 7 people trying to scramble for a seat on the same size bench that they had 2 people on. And so they asked people, well, what is it like if you're on the bench with 7 people and they're sort of like pushing and shoving? And then what is it like on the bench with 2 people? It's like you can stretch out and relax. And I think one of the things that happens is when we're in our kind of small world, we don't see a big picture. And so, and I run into this a lot in my work, where I work with a lot of people who are modest income, low income. They're taking our housing, used to be they're taking our jobs. And what's happened is people are being at the bottom of the pyramid, pitted against each other. And what we're not seeing, and somebody like Chuck Collins from United for a Fair Economy writes about this, is how many properties are being brought up for investment. We're not seeing income inequality. And so we get into kind of a blame game. And so I'm just trying to think if there are ways that we can, like, what's the response that I need to somebody who's on a housing list for over a year? And I know it could be 2 or 3 years for them being on a housing list that's not hateful to immigrants when they're feeling, again, squeezed on the bottom. So thank you.
Okay, Diane?
So you had mentioned, Felice had mentioned that WILPF has a policy about immigration. I've looked for it. I don't see it. Did someone put it in the chat, or because I'm interested in what WILPF says, I don't find it. And I think you meant WILPF US policy, not WILPF national, but I've looked both places. So I like it. Somebody could tell me where to find WILPF, what we've determined is our policy on it. Thank you.
Do you mean international, Diane?
I really wanted WILPF US. I thought that's what Felice said, but
Okay.
but maybe it was national. I don't know. I would both if there is policy by both.
Felice, can you answer?
I didn't say anything about WILPF. So maybe somebody else said
Oh,
that.
I'm sorry. I thought you did. Okay, I thought somebody said that we had established policies about immigration. I'm sorry if I misunderstood.
No. Somebody else may have said.
Okay.
Okay, and then Mary Hanson Harrison.
Yeah, I'd like to just add a little bit of even further back history to give Zenobia a shout out for the Mennonites, since you're indispensable in forming WILPF in one way or another, that the Mennonites were very strong in collaboration with Adams and the Peace Party, the Women's Peace Party. We both came out of there. And so also for nonviolent resistance and conscientious objectors. So I just wanted to relate to you that we have very good connections with the Mennonites. So thank you, Zenobia.
You're welcome. Say, if
I,
I, yes.
Sorry, I was former president of the U.S. section. Sorry.
Sure. If I could just say a few words, you know, coming out, being born in the ABLA community, and you know, just reflecting back on the sense of family and the, you know, provision that everybody felt like they were their brother and their sister's keeper. You know, we were very poor, but no one really wanted for a whole lot because people came and helped one another, and we didn't even realize we were poor because of that camaraderie, because of that community, sense of community. And as I think back on Jane Addams and, you know, her being a very prominent senator, I believe, state senator from Cedarville, Illinois, you know, what drove her, what gave her the vision to move forward, to make such a difference, you know, in the Chicago area. And it was the untimely death of her father that motivated her and gave her a sense of purpose. And, you know, I'm just amazed. People probably will ask, well, what would make someone like that want to help people in a community that she found, you know, in such, you know, in such a situation. But, you know, I'm just very grateful, and I think it's very worthy, you know, what we're doing to make a difference, you know, in people's lives. This being an immigrant, supposedly immigrant-friendly city, we're finding that it's been very unfriendly in many ways, you know, partly because of the false stories and statements and information that's been passed around to the current residents. You know, they're taking your jobs, they're taking your money, they're taking your homes. You know, we've just come out of the ABLA area with a very painful situation where our former mayor offered land that was promised to the residents of ABLA for 22 years, offered this land to a multimillionaire or billionaire to build a soccer field on this land, 25 acres, that has been promised and was promised to the residents. And they rightfully so are asking the question, well, what about us? And so the story kind of gets misconstrued about who is actually taking this land. It's not the immigrants. It's the people who have rich resources and are willfully taking this land that's not rightfully yours. And we've had, you know, many town hall meetings over the years, but just last year they started building on the land, and doesn't look like it's going to be reversed, even though, you know, we've made quite a bit of effort and brought community together. It has brought the community even more so together with our collaborators. But, you know, it's a sad thing to see.
Thanks, Zenobia. Teresa, you have your hand up.
Thank you. This is a great program, and I do want to see it become a reality, that there is a Chicago branch that has a steering committee, that has a bank account, so that it fits the really criteria for being a branch, that you have at least 10 paid up members. And so I will do all I can for my Chicago friends to get them to join the branch. So I'll be listening from Gloria about when we're ready to really launch the branch. But my question is about migration. I'm going to put in the chat that I am co-chair of the Advancing Human Rights Committee. And one of our working groups is migration and border justice. And we're having a very hard time with that because Black and brown people in WILPF are in low numbers compared to the numbers of Europeans. But I did want to remind people that Melissa Torres, who is of Mexican origin, struggled very hard inside of WILPF for years on getting WILPF to pay attention to the migration and border justice issue. And now our wonderful sister, Melissa, is a vice president in the international of WILPF. And so I don't want people to forget, since Mary Harrison reminded us that she was once a president in the U.S. section. I believe some of that struggle around migration and border justice happened on your watch, Mary. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm sure that many of you who've been around a long time remember our sister, Melissa Torres. So could we please not erase that history, that there have been attempts by people of Latin descent to advance that. And I would say migration of Africans into the U.S. has always been a significant thing. And so I just don't want us to lose sight of migration in its broadest sense and the need for justice now that we have people in Florida and Texas busing people uninvited into cities like Chicago and New York and other cities. So this is a very important issue. Next to the economy, migration is polling as the second most important issue in the upcoming presidential election. Thanks for listening.
Yeah, thank you. And next is Louise Eckridge. Louise is one of our WILPF partner groups from the Alliance for Just Money.
Right, yeah, it's Lucille.
Lucille, I'm sorry.
No problem. Yeah, so I just was asked to, or given an opportunity to share a few comments. I don't live in Chicago now. I live in Bloomington Normal, where I taught in the College of Ed at ISU for the last 20 years. But prior to that, I did live in Chicago for most of the 1980s and the second half of the 1990s in numerous different neighborhoods. You know, I could name them off that you would know if you're a Chicagoan, but on the south side, this near southwest side, the west side and the north side, you know, Pilsen, Greater Grand Crossing, Woodlawn, the Gap, Logan Square, Albany Park, West Rogers Park. So my roots go back to Chicago at ISU. I helped to found the Chicago Teacher Education Pipeline that did really community-based teacher education work in different parts of Chicago as well, 5 different parts of the city. And so when I heard that WILPF was starting a Chicago chapter, my ears picked up because even though the other chapter in Illinois that I could be a member of is about as far away in Rockford, I have a lot more roots in Chicago. It's where my early anti-war and political activism work was. My stepchildren grew up there. My son was born there. And much of my educational career through this Chicago Teacher Education Pipeline work. And so I only say that much to situate what I'm going to share is that because while it's different, I think it's very relevant, informed by my work in Chicago and relevant for the work that you're all doing in Chicago. And I can't fully explain its relevance. It's in the whole minute because I want to share the action that we're planning. But I do think that my lived experience there, if it resonates a little bit, and I haven't said enough about that either, maybe it will make you pay a little more attention to the links I'll share in the chat about something that is happening this May in Chicago. We're calling it May Day for Money. And my entry into WILPF, even though I heard about it in the 1980s because of, in my anti-apartheid work, a conscientious objector from South Africa, a white conscientious objector doing anti-apartheid work, toured in the US, and WILPF helped to sponsor some of his events. I really only joined about 1.5 years ago, and it was through a committee of WILPF, the Women, Money, and Democracy Committee. And together with them, the Alliance for Just Money, an organization I helped to found in 2018, did a webinar about 1 year ago called The Future in Our Pockets. And I'll put a link to that in the chat as well. But basically, the webinar and the work of the Alliance, and which is sponsoring this May Day for Money, and the Women, Money, and Democracy Committee is co-sponsoring it. It's about our existing money system. Duh, what's that? About its flaws, about the damage to people and planet, and the imperatives for war and debt and global inequity that money system causes, and its undermining of democracy with the whole role of money in politics, and how we can and why we must change it to create a just, sustainable, peaceful, democratic, political economies locally, nationally, and internationally. And so this May Day for Money event, let me hit this in the chat. It's happening May 17th to 18th to 19th in Chicago. And it's our first really public action. We only started about 5.5 years ago. And it's really intended to bring public and media attention to this flawed money system and how we can change it. And the main event is Saturday, May 18th. That's the 110th anniversary of the founding of the Fed, which, predates by not, 5 years or so, WILPF's founding. All these immigration issues are very affected by our money system. But so there'll be a march, there'll be a rally downtown Chicago, and all that will kind of happen midday Saturday. And Friday, we're going to be taking a letter to the Fed. It's a public letter that we're going to make available in March for organizations and individuals to sign. And we'll be hopefully delivering it there, also distributing copies, leafleting it, doing some street, art. And then we'll have some meals Friday and Saturday together, or might do a screening of a new documentary called Outgrow the System, which is talking about how our existing capitalist system and alternatives to it are necessary for achieving the climate action we need to achieve and the sustainability action. And really the money system is a systemic imperative, the systemic force of capitalism. So anyhow, it's, I think the basic issue is that all of the work we're all doing is crucial, whether it's peace and justice work, whether it's immigration work, whether it's educational work, whether it's community organizing work, housing work, everything, environmental. But the conditions for the possibility of those goals being achieved do not exist in our existing money system, whereas changing that system, and it takes a legislative change, can create, it doesn't solve all those problems overnight. It creates the conditions of the possibility where though that work can bear fruits. And that's kind of what we're trying to work on. And so I would invite you to look up the website, watch the little, it's 1.5 hours, maybe webinar. There's a lot on our website, but check out the May Day page. We need you. We want you. We're a small little not-for-profit national organization, but doing work that is extremely timely, because whether we want it or not, changes are coming in our national and international monetary system. And it's an opportunity to get it right finally. What we didn't get right in the 1930s during the Depression, what we didn't get right when the Fed was set up, what we did get right in the 1860s, the greenbacks when they were first created, but it wasn't, and that was used to fight the Northern's part of the Civil War and overcome, formal.
Thanks a lot, Lucille. That's a lot.
Yeah. That's enough. Sorry.
That's okay. Dee, your hand is up, and then Ellen Silverman, and then we have some final remarks.
Hi, Dee Murphy, WILPF US section. I was really happy to hear that the Chicago branch is now reforming. I have a strong history with Chicago as well. My family came up as migrants during the Great Migration during the 1950s and settled there. I was born there and spent large amounts of my life there, including my early years of college. One of the things that, and I now live in Minnesota. I migrated to Minnesota, and so there's a lot I can say about a lot of this. But one of the things that I've always wanted to work on, and I don't right now have the time to work on, but I would really encourage those who are assisting people who are immigrating, is to do cultural acclimation programs. Because a lot of times, like I mentioned in chat, people are brought here, they're encouraged to come and immigrate, but then they're put into poorer communities with people who are already traumatized and suffering. I myself have personally been spat at for wearing shorts in the wrong community, like by people who are Muslim. Like, men look at me and spit on the ground because they don't like them wearing shorts in their community. And my father served in the Air Force for 25 years. I mean, born and bred, like half of my ancestors are indigenous, or not half, but a percentage, and others were dragged over here, and there was no immigration involved with it. So to make myself and my family feel unwelcome here is maybe there needs to be more work with, if we're going to migrate, we need to understand the culture of the lands in which we're migrating. Recently, I tried to migrate myself out of here. I was going the other way. I was trying to go to Mexico. My thing was to learn Spanish and to learn the culture there and to acclimate myself and not try to go there and push my culture into other people's, cultures. So, once again, there can be some kind of mutual thing going on there. And the other part that I wanted to speak about is actually, it appears that there's still that element of racism here in the United States, where people from other cultures are accepted quicker than people, like Black people who were born and raised here. I'm living this experience right now. I'm out very far out, about 3 hours out of the cities in Minnesota. And there are people from Mexico here. There are people from Somalia here. Not as many from Somalia, but mostly from Mexico. And they're accepted as part of the community. But then I get stared at like, because there's only 123 Black people out of 4,500. I get stared at like I've got antennas on and made to feel like quite unwelcome, like lingering stares, people driving by, things like that. So it appears that in some areas of this country, there's more of a welcoming approach to people who are trying to come over here, and there's really nowhere for those of us that were born here to go to. There's no escape. And so I want to end with a final question, because it's been a while since I've been in Chicago. Is Cicero still like unwelcoming to Black people? Because I had lived there in the I won't date myself, but years ago, and there Mexicans again were part of that community, but there was a very unwelcoming attitude towards Black people moving there. It might be integrated now. So I'd like to know what happens in those communities where people do migrate. They form their own parallel societies and do not, really open up as a broader American culture. Thank you.
You're from Chicago. Could you answer about Cicero? I don't know much about it.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure. I know it has integrated much more than it did 20, 30 years ago. I know there are some churches in that area. I still think that there is still not a full welcoming of other minorities. to that area, but it has definitely changed. Dr. Garrett, I don't know if you can speak to that, if you would know that any more details about that or not.
Yeah, the area has changed. It's largely more Hispanic, population, but there are, Black people over there. So that has changed tremendously. By the way, my name is Dennis Garrett. I am an executive director of CHAMPS. CHAMPS is known as the Chicago Area Health and Medical Careers Program, now creating health and medical pathways for scholars. So there's our new name. We've been around since 1979. We were formerly a state mandated institution, increased the number of minority, physicians. And so Dr. Sowell and our products of it. And of course, we have been battling this issue of housing, which is a part of the immigration issue. I'm gonna come back to my sister about my sister from Minnesota in just a second. Battling this issue of housing. So the former executive director is fighting this issue with housing going back, to the 60s and 70s, and we're still fighting the issue. So it didn't make any sense what the former mayor did in terms of going to a billionaire, rather than going to the existing people in the community, like the churches, and to work with us in terms of the work that we were doing. Even with housing is an issue even for our students, and that's a problem in terms of if you don't have housing, it's very, very difficult then to consistently be a student, let alone to go to medical school or dental school.
We're running over time. I see two hands. We're going to let Mr. Garrett finish up. Then we're going to take Ellen. Then we're going to take Mary, and then I'm going to introduce Gloria. Okay?
I'll be quick, brother. I haven't said anything. So here's the issue. I agree with you, and so there's a constant battle. But it also goes back to the speaker when she said that when immigrants, come here, right, they're made to feel bad, when they come here, to the country, and so as they try to look to immigrate, right, it's very easy for them in terms of wanting to immigrate to do what the present majority population do, and that is be racist. So it stems, don't let us keep the focus on the present population, the present power structure that facilitates different ethnic groups fighting each other. And that has to deal with, wealth, obviously, redistribution, and again, keeping up the chaos so we fight each other. But yet we do have to challenge the immigrants that come here and say, no, that behavior is unacceptable. And I'm gonna stop there.
All right. Well, thank you. I'm going to take Ellen. I'll take Mary, and then I'm going to introduce Gloria. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that. I want to say that on the national level, the dialogue has been really critical of immigration, as you well know. And for the first time last night, I heard someone speak out truth that I think needs to be repeated over and over and over again. And it's someone who is very much bashed by the far right, and that's AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She was on MSNBC last night on Alex Wagner's show, and she was saying positive things about how immigrants impact us in a positive way. And she spoke so many truths that are just not revealed, that they pay taxes that they never get to benefit from, like Social Security. She didn't mention that, but I will. And that that they need a path to citizenship, and that this is all totally ignored. And I just found it so refreshing to hear someone speak out so clearly and so in a positive fashion, that I think I needed to say that to you all. I know you're all mired in the local politics, especially, and of course you should be, but I just wanted to share that. That was very uplifting to hear.
Thank you, Gloria. We'll take Mary Harrison. I think you're muted.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Michael. Thank you. I wanted to share a little bit about Chicago, go back to Dee. my daughter is the dean of Health and Human Services at Governor State University, which is just a little bit outside of Chicago. And she works with the women in the South Side of Chicago, which is predominantly Black. And she is working with breast cancer and other cancers, predominantly for women. And yeah, there's a lot of work being done on the South Side, and thanks to the grant that she's gotten. But it's still very the health situation is still very, very difficult, and just I can only say there's a little bit of hope, since we're trying to do something for the South Side. So
Thanks, Mary.
All right. Well, I'm going to put my 2 cents in, and then I'm going to introduce Gloria. Okay. One of the things that my 2 cents is, for what it's worth, here's what we know, and the numbers don't lie. Facts are facts. Every single day, 10,000 baby boomers retire out of the workforce. And we know that there is a minimum of 10 million jobs unfilled in the United States. And we are looking at this immigrant situation as a zero-sum game, and it's not. The media and the press likes to portray that if someone gets something, it's taking something away from someone else, which is patently untrue. We are the land of plenty, and there's plenty of jobs, there's plenty of resources for everyone, but it's how it's distributed. And I sit on the county board here where I live, and one of the members said something to the effect that, well, if we do it, how are we going to pay for it? What are we willing to give up? And my answer was really pretty clear to me. We don't have to give up anything outside of those tax cuts for the top 1%. If those tax cuts for the top 1% are paid, this is the land of plenty. We can survive. We can fill the 10 million jobs that are companies are literally going out of business because they can't find workers. Yet we have people sleeping on the streets. This is unconscionable, and we have the remedy and the solution right here in our hands if we can get past the corporate greed and really start to look at the betterment of society. All right, with that, I am going to introduce the lady that brought me to this group, and I'm really excited about her. She just does so much good work, and again, I was just kind of riding around one day and my phone rang, and she introduced herself and started talking about the work that WILPF does. And so I am so proud to know her, and I'd like to introduce Gloria McMillan to the group. And Gloria, it's your time to talk now.
Got to unmute here. Thank you so much, Michael. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Anyway, I am honored to be here as well. And I don't say this to put any immigrant down, but I am proud to have been born and raised in East Chicago, the steel hub of Chicago. And my dad was raised on the south side on Commercial Avenue near Anthony, near Commercial. And my mother was raised partially on Armitage up near Lincoln Park. So, I mean, we were all over the place. But anyway, this is me, Gloria McMillan, from the WILPF Chicago Branch Restart Team. And I want to thank each of you that came today, because special thanks to Michael. We're becoming really tight, Michael and I. Anyway, for being our facilitator. Felice Batlin, you did a great job, Felice. Angela Medina, who had to leave, and she got a lot of substantive information in about our Jane Addams Peace Association and books in the schools. both Reverend Zenobia and Marilyn Foster. It was all wonderful. Plus, the big bonus was people jumping in. That's what we've been waiting for. So we are determined to reactivate WILPF's flagship Chicago branch.
Yes.
These virtual events are a lead up to an in-person meeting that we're planning for later in the year. Our next virtual event will touch on some of that money madness and the whole monetary system. That'll be part of it, and we'll have some other speaker as well. So everyone registered for this event will get an invitation to the next one, because we are serious, Teresa Elamine, about building membership in Chicago. We're seeking progressive women who are invested in peacemaking, conflict resolution, and a feminist vision for this world without war. Amen. Where everyone has a chance to thrive. So please take a moment if you're interested and visit our website. Click the join button, which will take you to a form to complete, and it lets you enter your contact information to pay a year's dues. And I don't want to say that's just $35, because I was poor enough that wasn't minor, but it's for many people minor, $35 a year, which will give you joint membership in WILPF US and WILPF International. You'll receive our Peace and Justice magazine, and you'll get our monthly news. This is all very good stuff. It helps you to network. So you can keep up with the organizing that WILPF women are doing across the US. And I want to say, finally, I'm so glad you all came. And on behalf of WILPF US and the entire Chicago Restart team, thanks for joining us, and have a great rest of your weekend.
All right, Glory. Well, thank you. And again, it's she says $35, but I look at it like it's 67 cents a week. So
yeah.
Whoa!
That's, you can't even buy a candy bar for 67 cents.
No kidding.
Great.
Thank
Hi, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you a lot.
Bye-bye.